My name is John Cannon, and as some of you may know by now, I'm a big Georgia fan. But I'm not close to being the biggest dog fan there ever was. That distinction goes to my father, who's now dead. As some of you know, he died from elderly abuse and multiple felonies that killed him at Emory. But I'm not going to talk about that in this YouTube. Today we're going to focus, or right now I'm going to focus on some of this Georgia stuff that I'm selling and some other memorabilia that I'm selling to raise some money to publicize the elderly abuse that murdered my father. I'm also, everything I've ever had, everything my parents and I ever worked for, it's all gone. But I already have 2 YouTubes out there that some of you have already seen telling the story about what Emory did to my father. And I will be putting more of those out there. But today I'm just going to talk about Georgia stuff. And I'm going to start it off by talking about my father. I've written a book called Murder on Clifton Road that's not yet published. But I'm thinking of doing a subtitle under that, The Murder of the World's Biggest Dog Fan. My father at the age of 13 took a train from Atlanta to Athens to go to the first game at Sanford Stadium. And this is what Sanford Stadium looked like in 1929. Georgia beat Yale 15-0. He was 13. My father was an orphan. He was adopted by his mother's half-sister. He was raised over near Piedmont Park. In fact, he caddied when he was younger for Bobby Jones. My father, besides being a World War II veteran, as some of you have heard in previous YouTubes, fought with General Patton at the Battle of the Bulge, was wounded 3 times, was an Atlanta fireman for 40 years. But let me get back to Georgia. So at the age of 13, he went to the first game. He went to many more. Then in the late 30s, Coach Butz, a former Georgia coach, and some of you young folks may never have heard of Coach Butz, but some of the older dog fans know that Coach Butz was at Georgia for close to 20 years before Coach Dooley came. There was a coach called Johnny Griffin between Coach Butz and Coach Dooley. Coach Butz came to my grandmother's, his mother's house near Piedmont Park to recruit my father's best friend, whose name was Tommy Malone. Tommy Malone did get a scholarship to Georgia. He was a receiver. He also was a good baseball player, as my father was. But my father never lettered at Georgia. He was a football scrub prior to going to World War II under Coach Butz. I'm going to give you some events letting you know that he by far was the world's biggest dog fan. First off, after when Emory murdered him and I had to bury him in 2007, my father and I had been to close to 500 UGA games together, home and away. His favorite player, as I mentioned earlier, was the great Charlie Trippi. My favorite player was Herschel Walker. When my father came back from the war, he became an Atlanta fireman, but he still attended UGA games. One of the funniest stories he ever told me, and I think I have these years right. My memory, just like my father's, and I have a beautiful special needs daughter, her memory's incredible too. As he rode the train when Georgia played North Carolina in the 1947 Sugar Bowl. Georgia's player then was Johnny Rauch. Great college player, went on to play in the NFL, and I believe became an NFL coach for the Buffalo Bills. John Rauch, R-A-U-C-H. North Carolina, their star player was a guy named Choo-Choo Justice, Charlie Choo-Choo Justice. So Georgia rode the train to New Orleans. The team train not only had the team on it, but it had a bunch of Georgia fans. Of course, back then we didn't have social media, and so a lot of people didn't even know, because Charlie Trippier, of course, wore a helmet on the field. They didn't even know what he looked like. So my father never actually told me this, but I assume he got liquored up on the train trip, as all the Georgia fans probably got liquored up. So my father was going through the cars telling people he was Charlie Trippy. And they believed him. They were buying him drinks. Anyway, when they got to New Orleans, Coach Butz, who now was my father's friend, let my father sleep with the team that night before the game. And they slept, no, not in the hotel. They slept on the floor at Tulane on the basketball court. That's where they slept. Georgia did win 20-10. Some other events my father went to was the 1959 SEC championship game between Auburn and UGA in Athens. And some of you old timers may recall the name of the great Fran Tarkenton. Well, Tarkenton threw a pass, the final minutes of the game, in the northeast end zone to a guy named Bill Herron. That tied the game up 13-13, and then Durward Pennington kicked the extra point, 14-13. My father was in the corner of that end zone. He jumped the hedges. My mother told me he got in a little trouble for doing that. But we're not going to tell that story. But a few years prior to that, he was at Grant Field. I was born in 55. Georgia broke the drought. Tech had won, 7 straight years? And a guy named Thorne Sapp out of Macon, Georgia, whose number you'll see at the stadium, it's retired, scored the touchdown to beat Tech at Grant Field. That's called the drought breaker. We also attended, my father and I, we played Tech, the first game in basketball at the Stegman Coliseum, which would have been in 1964 maybe. And it was at that time, it was called the Georgia Coliseum. We beat Tech. My father started getting season tickets in 1966. One of the first games I remember going to was before that. And this gentleman is still living. His name is Ronnie Jenkins. And Ronnie will tell you this, he still can never forget it. He fumbled on the 1-inch line going in against Auburn at Sanford Stadium, and we lost. But I'm not going to bring up many more Georgia names because some of y'all are on my Facebook, and I don't want to leave you out. But let's run through a few significant things if you're a Georgia fan or a Georgia player. The 1965 Flea Flick, I can't even pronounce it, from Kirby Moore to Pat Hodson to Bob Taylor to beat Alabama 18-17 in Athens. My father and I were there. I was, 9 years old. Then we move into the 70s, 75, the Matt Robinson end around to Richard Appleby to Gene Washington. Then we move around to the 76 Georgia-Florida game, and that's always been known as one of the stupidest plays ever in Florida history. They were at their own 29 in the third quarter. They were beating us still by like 2 touchdowns, and they went for it. And a guy named Johnny Henderson from Macon, Georgia, stopped it. Georgia went on to win. Ray Goff had a great game that day. Then, of course, the 1978 game in Athens, where we were down, kept coming back. Scott Warner returned a punt. I said I wasn't going to name names, but, I can see these games like they're happening right now. So I'm throwing out some names. Scott Warner returned a punt. Then Drew Hill from Tech returned the kickoff. Then we got about a minute left, and a young quarterback comes in. His name is Buck Ballou. He throws a touchdown pass to Amp Arnold. Georgia's still behind by a point. Dooley decides to go for 2, and Ballou pitches to Amp Arnold, and Amp Arnold scores. Georgia wins 29-28. Of course, the Herschel Walker, Lindsey Scott, Buck Bellew, 1980 game in Jacksonville, where Munson came through his steel chair, and he said the stadium will have to be rebuilt. And then all the wonderful things that happened, all of that, after that. The Lars Tates, the Popewood Smiths. These are just some people that are on my Facebook. Jimmy Holton, Tommy Thurston, Bill Krug, the great game he had against Alabama in '76 when we could have beaten an NFL team that day. But anyway, I think you're starting to get the picture. My father, until he was murdered, went to Georgia events for close to 80 years. And I went, after I was born, to about 500 games with him. Not only football, but basketball and baseball. Basketball, both men and women. Okay, these items are mostly Georgia items, and I'm selling them, most of them, to raise money to fight elderly abuse. In my second video about my father's murder at Emory, I've shown some of these. I'm showing a few more. Anyway, I'm a graduate of Georgia Southern. I have a nursing scholarship in my mother's memory at Georgia Southern. This is when I had some money. I own now 4 grave sites at Westview Cemetery. Also, we made a donation to the Georgia Southern baseball facility. It's my parents' name, Helen and Dick Cannon. That's my ex-wife, Debbie. That's my daughter, and that's me. We donated to have the baseball dressing room redone. Also, my family name is on the Butz Mayor building. So when you walk in the Butz Mayor building, the donor wall on the right, with all these other Georgia folks that donated, the Richard C. Cannon family. That's my family. I got nothing now. I don't even own these clothes. I've been at this motel room hiding out for 3 years and 6 months. But here we go. Again, away jersey, Latrell Green sign, top and bottom, leading scorer in Georgia history, Latrell Green out of Mississippi. Football Georgia jersey signed by Ray Goff. Coach Dooley's 200th victory against Tech. And then he won his 201st victory, which my father and I were there in the Gator Bowl against Michigan State. Michigan State had a player named Andre Rison. It's signed by Coach Dooley. And then just some other stuff. This is hung in my father's room, Herschel and Coach Dooley. I also owned, when they tore down Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, 2 seats from the stadium. I no longer have the seats. I've got the certificate, but I don't have the seats. This is signed by Jerry West when the Lakers played the Celtics in the Boston Garden. Also pictured in this picture are Bill Russell, Elgin Baylor, signed by Jerry West. Balls that you've seen before, maybe in another video of mine, Georgia team balls, Georgia coaches balls, individual balls signed by Garrison Hurst, Rodney Hampton. This is Boomer Esiason, who played at Maryland and was an NFL quarterback and played in the Super Bowl against Joe Montana when he was the quarterback of the Cincinnati Bengals. Earl Campbell. I own about 500 Sports Illustrated magazines and other old magazines. They're in excellent condition. Got about 500 of them. Yeah, I had to show this. I owned about 30 of these Sports Illustrated swimsuit. This is probably the only one of those I still have left, but that is Christy Brinkley. So hey, I'm by myself in a motel room. I gotta have a little fun. These are old programs that I'll probably keep. This is signed by Herschel Walker from the Sugar Bowl. I'll probably keep. I've got old Falcons programs, Georgia programs, but of course the Georgia ones I'll keep. Anyway, please contact me. As several of you know, I used to be a huge sports memorabilia collector. I did a lot of charity events. If you remember the Greg Olson cast, I used to own it. It was signed by all the Braves. I owned a guitar signed by the Rolling Stones. No longer have any of these items. They're gone. When Emory did this to my father, crooked and corrupt DAs, crooked and corrupt attorneys, and of course, corrupt Emory made sure I had nothing. Here's a guitar signed by the Rolling Stones. I had multiple items pertaining to Mickey Mantle. That's a Michael Jordan All-Star short sign. There's Mickey Mantle bats, gloves, caps. This is all gone. All gone. So please, dogs, help me out. But also, please, get this story out to all your dog friends. What happened to my father at Emory happens all the time to the elderly. As I mentioned before, I'm a former cardiac therapist and hospital department administrator. I worked at 3 major Atlanta hospitals. In fact, the great Billy Payne was a patient of mine at Georgia Baptist Medical Center. Billy had heart bypass surgery at an early age. He was a patient of mine in 82 and 83. So please email me. If you just want to give me some of your Georgia stories, some of your old dog players, please give them to me. And I'll say, yeah, I remember you doing that and that and that. So if you want to get some praise for stuff you did 30 years ago, I saw you play. And I've got a pretty good memory. And I can probably say, do you remember when I did this? And I'll say, yeah, Bill Krug, or Lawrence Tate, or Pulpwood Smith, or whomever, or Matt Robinson. I saw you. I remember you doing that. So if you'll email me, if you're interested in buying some of this stuff, I'll tell you the price. I'm not good with social media. The gentleman that's filming this right now is an incredible young man. And I would love to send you his YouTubes. He has a story to tell. He's a graduate of Georgia State University. My ex-wife, who's a Georgia State University professor for 30 years, taught him in a class. That's sort of how we got to talking. He's much younger than me. He was a captain of his Georgia State University football team. He was coached by Bill Curry. And even though we're dog fans, we know about Bill Curry. Great Tech player. He was born in Athens. Played for the Green Bay Packers and for the Baltimore Colts. It's a center, so he snapped to Johnny Unitas and Bart Starr. But this young man that's filming this also tried out for the Falcons and the Seahawks. And he still is following his dream. And now he's just signed to play in Bismarck with an arena football team. And he's also played professionally in China. I would love for you to hear his story. He and his family have an amazing story to tell. And he was homeless.